5 years into our campaigning, 1 year of doing this rescue event, and Congress got serious this time. And a bipartisan piece of legislation was introduced, and we got after it. One more year of campaigning, and we had kind of our second mountaintop experience being in the Oval Office with President Obama when he signed this bill into law. It's Laren, founder, Jason, founder, that's me, I swear, we're not photoshopped, we're really in there. Members of Congress, Congolese ambassador, Ugandan ambassador, advocacy partners, assistant secretary for African affairs. I remember we were standing outside the Oval Office in a line to meet the president on the way into the Oval. And it was the first time in my life, because I shook his hand and I was like, Mr. President, my name is Ben Keesey, and it's an honor to meet you. And it's the first time in my life that I ever gave myself an immediate congratulations for getting my own name right. I was like, yes, got my name right. Because you're so nervous, it's the president and he's so iconic. And he said in this room, he said, are you still in touch with that boy from your movie? Talking about Jacob. And he said, you tell that boy the president of the United States is going to do something about this. And we walked out of that room again. It was like, yes, we did it. It's over. This feeling like we've done enough. What more can you do? And as the story goes, not just a few months later, Obama ordered U.S. Special Forces, the first time in American history that U.S. Special Forces were deployed to an issue, not because the National Security Team wanted it or the Pentagon wanted it, but because the people asked for it. Deployed 100 U.S. Special Forces to work with the African Union troops to track down the LRA, okay? Now, calendar, we're in 2011, okay? We were like, we got it. What more can you get than a bill with Congress, the president, U.S. Special Forces deployed, and we thought the only thing that we can do now is just make sure there's a climate of positivity around this action. There were some voices like John McCain's what are we doing? We're sending troops to go track down a what? There was some folks out there, so we said the biggest thing that we can do is just create a climate of positivity and public support for this action, and that's when we come up with this idea. This is our initial campaign poster. You can see the icon of the Republicans, the icon of the Democrats coming together for peace. You can see that imagery. One thing we can all agree on, it's kind of ironic looking back because this was so controversial, but it was kind of funny to look at that. But how we came up with this idea was, it started with the intention, again, of a climate of positivity. And we thought of this phrase that actually Michael thought of. We need to make Coney famous. That the reality of who he is bad enough that if we just tell his story, that will be sufficient to have the public support we needed to make sure we followed through on the mission. So it was a very clear intention of major mass awareness around this idea. We gave that intention to our creative department, which was it was large for our organization. There's about 10 people. For a charity of our size, we were about 40, 50 full-time staff, and about 10 of those were either filmmakers, designers, photographers, web developers. And they pitched us, executive team, ideas on campaigns, on brands, on looks, and it was a fairly junior designer named Tyler who pitched us this idea. Playing off the election idea, of the election cycle in 2012, the bright red, very noticeable, the simple name, Coney 2012. That didn't come from the executive team. It came from a junior staff, and I think, I'm going to expand on this more, but in terms of organizationally, how did we do it? We had an environment of radical empowerment of all people within our office. It's the only reason that I believe it's the only reason that we got, 700 kids a year to apply to be roadies and to want to work for us for free, is that when they got involved, they knew they weren't just pouring coffee and like running errands. They were seriously a part of this. And I think that's the only reason we got so many people to work for us so hard for such a small amount of money. So come up with a campaign idea, like we talked about. We have our intention. We have our new rowdy class. This, again, these are photos from my phone. This is what it looked like a couple days before launch. You know, roadies, this is them ready to pack up their vans with all the merch. We covered the vans, we repainted them for this tour because we were going all out. You know, again, we thought this was the year. And took some cool photos. This is our art team cracking some cheap beers after we finished the film. This is President Obama's first inauguration. There was about 1 million people there in person. Our film hit 1 million views on day one. The Oscars gets about 40 million people. The Coney film hit that on day 4. And then the Super Bowl, the most watched media event in the US, our film hit 100 million views on day 6. Our goal had been 500,000 views for the year. It's funny because a lot of people heard about the Coney Campaign from like, you know, the random like cousin or nephew who doesn't give a crap about anything, you know, and they're like, what are you talking about Africa for? Like all like, that's my thing, you know, or like a human rights cause, like you're not supposed to talk about that. Like it broke out, right? It broke out of the traditional circles. It broke out of preaching to the choir, and it got up in the business of a lot of people who aren't used to or have never talked about an issue in Africa, an issue of international justice. And, you know, organizationally, it was pretty overwhelming. You know, from being the most neglected humanitarian issue in the world to the cover of Time magazine, you know, I can say if you're ever going to launch a campaign that reaches 100 million views, your PR team needs to be bigger than one intern. Our intern, yeah, her name was Monica, she was 19. And it was overwhelming, you know, and you saw like the internet at its like funniest, you know, right away. It was like Joseph Coney checking his Facebook and being like, hold on, let me just check. You know, you saw the internet at its best and funniest, and then we saw, you know, the internet at its worst. And the flip side of the empowerment, that we all get a message, we all get a voice online. You know, Facebook doesn't filter out dumb comments. This idea that Joseph Coney may have died, this was started by this was a YouTube video posted by a Ugandan girl living in Canada who said, who her story is that her dad told her that Joseph Coney was dead. This got 10 million views on YouTube, and this was a meme that we really struggled with, like organizationally, really had to struggle against this word scam, this idea that we made it up, this idea that we concocted this whole story for fill-in-the-blank reason, because we were trying to militarize the continent of Africa, we were trying to be a pawn of the CIA, or we were just trying to make money for ourselves. This was internally at Invisible Children, if you were in our office, this was the word that was really, that we were trying to fight against the most, scam. Not just that we were like, you know, in the academic community, that we were loose with the facts or simplifying things or wasn't looking at the complexities of post-colonial Africa. It was that we made it all, it was actually that we made the whole thing up was one of the harshest things, the things that we were like fighting against. And if you saw the story, you know, Jason, who was in the film, whose 5-year-old was in the film, 10 days after the launch of the campaign, had a very public breakdown on the streets of San Diego that was devastating. As a friend, you know, he's the founder of our company. He was the spokesperson. And he's in the ambulance in the hospital after having a naked meltdown in front of his house in San Diego. You know, you guys that were a part of that know that these were some of the hardest days, weeks of our lives. You put your heart and soul into something and you get questioned of everything.